Welcome to section 19.2, Population Growth and Regulation. Picture a field of wildflowers in spring. Within weeks, a handful of blossoms can explode into thousands. That's exponential growth in action. Now, imagine the sounds, and especially the smells, of a penguin colony like the one on this slide. Penguins pack tightly together on limited nesting grounds, jostling for space and resources. As their numbers grow, competition for food and territory intensifies. Predators take notice, and disease spreads more easily. Over time, these density-dependent factors slow growth and regulate the population. Penguin colonies, like all populations, are shaped by environmental limits and ecological interactions. In this section, we'll explore the models and mechanisms that explain these dynamics. By the end of this section, you should be able to explain the characteristics and differences between exponential and logistic growth patterns, provide real-world examples of each, describe how a habitat's carrying capacity can change over time, and compare and contrast density-dependent and density-independent growth regulation using examples from nature. Population ecologists use mathematical models to predict how populations change. Two primary models, exponential and logistic growth, offer different perspectives. Exponential growth describes a world without limits, while logistic growth incorporates reality. Resources are finite. Understanding both gives us insight into how species interact with their environments. Exponential growth occurs when resources are unlimited and populations increase at a constant rate. The result is a J-shaped curve. Exponential growth is dramatic, but in nature, it's rarely sustainable for long. This slide shows bacterial growth in a petri dish. The growth of 5 different strains of Bacillus subtilis is observed over a week. Starting with 1,000 cells, they can double every hour, reaching 16 billion cells in just 24 hours if there is sufficient space and nutrient availability. In real ecosystems, growth doesn't continue unchecked. Logistic growth introduces carrying capacity, or capital letter K, the maximum population size an environment can support. As populations approach K, growth slows, creating an S-shaped curve. Yeast in a test tube show this pattern. As nutrients run out, growth levels off, and populations fluctuate around the carrying capacity K. Carrying capacity isn't fixed. It can vary with environmental conditions, seasons, or resource availability. For example, drought may lower K for grazing animals, while a wet season can raise it. Climate change, habitat destruction, and resource depletion all influence carrying capacity, affecting how populations stabilize or crash. Density-dependent factors intensify as populations grow. Predation, competition for resources, and disease spread more easily in dense populations. Wildebeest herds, for instance, experience higher juvenile mortality when food becomes scarce. These mechanisms act like brakes, preventing populations from overshooting their environment's limits. Here's a classic logistic growth example. In a fresh test tube, yeast have abundant sugar and oxygen, so the population takes off fast. But as they consume nutrients and produce waste like ethanol, growth slows. The curve levels off near carrying capacity, or K, because resources become limiting and waste accumulates. You'll often see a small oscillation around the carrying capacity, a slight overshoot as cells keep dividing based on yesterday's conditions, followed by a correction as mortality and slower reproduction catch up. This simple setup shows how real populations are checked by resource limits and negative feedbacks, not just by predators. Carrying capacity isn't a fixed number. It's a moving target shaped by the environment. In a wet season, plants grow better, so herbivores can be supported at a higher K. In a drought, the same habitat supports far fewer individuals. Disturbances matter too. A wildfire or algal bloom can slash K in the short term, while nutrient pulses can temporarily raise it. Examples of nutrient pulses include events like a mast year in forests, in which many trees of the same species in a forest produce unusually large amounts of seeds or nuts all at once, or upwelling in oceans, which brings deep, cold, nutrient rich water to the ocean's surface. Human activities like irrigation, fertilizers, habitat loss, pollution, and climate change also shift K by altering resource supply and habitat quality. The big takeaway here is that when conditions change, K changes and populations respond, sometimes stabilizing at a new level, sometimes crashing if they overshoot. Density dependent factors kick in as populations get crowded. Per capita birth rates drop and or death rates rise because individuals compete more intensely for food, water, territories, or nesting sites. Disease spreads faster with more close contacts, and predators often become more effective when prey are abundant. Think of large herbivore herds. When forage is scarce, juveniles are the first to suffer and survival drops. These density-linked breaks create negative feedback that helps keep populations near carrying capacity. In contrast to density-independent shocks like storms or droughts, density-dependent regulation scales with population size and is a key reason logistic growth curves flatten instead of running away. Wild donkey populations illustrate density-dependent effects. As herd density increases, competition for water and food intensifies, leading to reduced growth rates and higher juvenile mortality. This case shows how resource scarcity can regulate population size naturally, even without outside interference. Density independent factors, such as weather, natural disasters, or pollution, affect populations regardless of size. A hurricane doesn't spare a sparse deer herd any more than a dense one. These forces can reset population sizes unpredictably, sometimes overwhelming density-dependent controls. Population regulation is rarely simple. Density-dependent and density-independent factors often interact. For example, a harsh winter may devastate a deer population, but the ability of the population to recover will depend on density-dependent factors like food competition and predation. This interplay creates complex population dynamics. The woolly mammoth's extinction illustrates this complexity. Climate change reduced their habitat, human hunting increased pressure, and habitat fragmentation isolated populations. Competition with humans for resources and genetic isolation compounded these challenges. Extinctions often result from multiple factors acting together, not a single cause. Ecologists categorize species by their reproductive strategies. Our selected species, like insects, produce many offspring with little parental care, thriving in unpredictable environments. K-selected species, like elephants, produce fewer offspring but invest heavily in their survival, thriving near carrying capacity. These strategies reflect adaptations to different ecological conditions. Exponential growth shows populations without limits, while logistic growth reflects environmental constraints. Carrying capacity shifts with changing conditions. Density-dependent and density-independent factors regulate populations, sometimes in complex ways. And reproductive strategies, from R-selected insects to K-selected elephants, demonstrate nature's diverse solutions to survival challenges.